Hello, and welcome to Between the Rows. I'm Robert Arnason of the Western Producer, your host for this week's show. Vaclav Smil, a University of Manitoba scientist, says that by 2025, half of the world's food production will depend upon the Haber-Bosch process, which is used to make nitrogen fertilizer. Ammonia, urea, and other nitrogen fertilizers do put food on our tables, but those products are manufactured with natural gas. The process creates a massive amount of carbon dioxide, perhaps 1.5% of the total emissions on Earth. Scientists are trying to cut those emissions, including researchers from the University of Minnesota, who have devised a way to make nitrogen fertilizer from wind power. On today's show, we'll hear from one of the scientists behind that project and another U of Minnesota expert who has built a tractor that runs on ammonia and diesel fuel. But before we hear about that University of Minnesota research, here's a word from our sponsor.
Farm kids are fortunate. We inherit the land and the lessons that come with it. The lessons are more valuable. I learned early on while chopping thistle on our Kansas cattle farm the value of hard work. I use this every day at Case IH. Because if it's valuable, you pass it on. My name is Ryan. I am a farmer, and I work for Case IH.
Case IH, built by farmers.
In June, I drove to Morris, Minnesota, on the western side of the state, to attend a farm energy conference. Part of the conference focused on green ammonia, or ammonia produced from renewable energy instead of natural gas. Mike Reese is a renewable energy expert at the University of Minnesota's West Central Research and Outreach Center in Morris. I spoke with Reese in his office after the first day of the conference. Just first question here. So you guys have quite a unique pilot project here, and it's sort of like first in the world research. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure. Back in 2013, we commissioned the first in the world wind to ammonia pilot plant. And so typically ammonia is produced using natural gas, and you take natural gas through a process called steam methane reforming, essentially to get to the hydrogen. And that's performed on what are called world scale plants, so very large plants, centrally located. I believe today we learned that there's about 200 plants worldwide. So you can about imagine to produce enough fertilizer to feed the crops worldwide. Those are large scale plants. What we're talking about though is taking that same concept but bringing it down to a local level and using renewable resources to provide the hydrogen. And so rather than have these mega scale plants, we plan to support the commercial development of plants that use wind and solar power to electrolyze water. And so we're getting our hydrogen from water, and then we pull nitrogen from the air and put it together to form anhydrous ammonia. And it's the same product that farmers apply to their fields here in the Midwest United States. And it's also used to produce other forms of nitrogen fertilizer like urea ammonium nitrate, monoammonium phosphate, and diammonium phosphate.
Okay, so at the pilot plant that you have not too far away from where we're speaking in your office right now, that you have the wind turbine there, you have the ability to produce how much ammonia, like what's the capacity of this pilot plant?
It's a fairly small pilot plant. We produce about 6 pounds of ammonia per hour. It's not a scale that you would use on a farm or to produce ammonia on a local basis. When we talk about local small scale ammonia production, we usually think of it in terms of county-wide or multiple counties. And even though we're doing it this small scale still matters. So it's difficult to do this at a farm scale because of the capital and operational costs. But we do believe that there's a roadmap forward to do it at a county scale.
So the next step in this process is you're going to sort of like, I guess, partner with some industry folks and scale up to a larger size to work out some of the technical issues and then hopefully get to commercialization. Is that kind of where things are at right now?
Yeah, in many respects it is. The first plant that we installed was again first in the world. There was a lot of things that were not optimized in that system, and so we received funding and we got together with some other academic partners and commercial partners, and we're going to be installing a plant that's about 15 times larger, and it's going to be optimized for energy and also to optimize to deal with the intermittency of renewable resources. One thing there's a couple things that really drive the cost of green ammonia. One is the electricity price. If you can get electricity price in the 2 cent per kilowatt range, like you perhaps could with hydroelectric power or in some cases wind energy, I think it's going to be cost effective. One of the other drivers is the what goes into producing the hydrogen itself. The capital costs of electrolyzers that are used to separate hydrogen from water is extremely expensive, but also it's very expensive to store hydrogen, and so that's one thing you want to limit. You don't want to store very much hydrogen, and so you want to continue to produce ammonia when you're producing hydrogen, so you can eliminate that aspect.
So there was really strong attendance today at the event, and because obviously of the price of nitrogen fertilizer these days, which is through the roof, there's a much more interest in what you guys are doing here in this technology and the opportunity. What have you seen over the last year or so?
Yeah, the interest is tremendous, but to be honest with you, the interest hasn't really grown because of the price of the fertilizer. The interest started in ammonia a couple years ago. Renewed interest in it, and much of that was driven by the interest in decarbonizing nitrogen fertilizer, but also decarbonized transportation fuel and decarbonizing power generation. If you're a utility and you want to be 100% renewable or have zero carbon electricity, you can use solar and wind energy to get a long ways in that process, but you kind of hit a glass ceiling where the last 30% is very challenging. Batteries are extremely expensive to meet the rest of that. So you're probably producing solar and wind more solar and wind than what you need at times. And so the idea of storing that power is kind of critical. Again, batteries are very expensive, and we could produce hydrogen and produce ammonia and then use that for power generation at some future point in time. The benefit of ammonia from a long duration storage standpoint is that it's much less costly than batteries, and it's much less costly to store anhydrous ammonia versus hydrogen. Obviously, if you're using hydrogen to produce ammonia, you would think it'd be that would be what you'd want to use to produce electricity, either through a genset or a fuel cell. But that's not the way it works. It's just because hydrogen is so costly to store.
Okay. Last question for you. So could you envision a future, say 15, 20 years down the road, where across the Northern Plains, Minnesota, stretching out to Montana, there are, a number of these smaller green ammonia plants? Like, what do you think the future looks like in terms of the connection to agriculture here, and who will own and operate these plants?
I think there's many opportunities. There might be a diversity of ownership. First of all, you might have utilities that operate the plants and make use of excess wind and solar power. There could be farm cooperatives that partner with utilities, maybe partner with ethanol plants, for example, to produce ammonia. But I mentioned ethanol plants because ethanol plants emit CO2. And if you're going to decarbonize ethanol biofuel production, you can capture that CO2 and combine it with ammonia to produce urea. And so you could have a lot of different opportunities there. You can decarbonize farming, the farm operations. You can, whether it's crop or livestock, you can decarbonize biofuel production. You can increase and expand the use of renewable power generation in areas that might be stranded where you can't sell wind power or solar power, even though they might have great resource. And then you can produce valuable products that can in turn support rural economies. So I think there's a lot of benefits for doing this, and I do believe that within the next few years we're going to start to see these come into rural parts of the upper Midwest and perhaps even into Canada.
Right. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Thank you.
You've been listening to Mike Reese, a renewable energy expert at the University of Minnesota and one of the hosts of the 2022 Midwest Farm Energy Conference. While at the conference in Morris, Minnesota, I also spoke with Seamus Kane, a mechanical engineer at the University of Minnesota. Since about 2016, he's been studying ammonia as a fuel source for tractors, grain dryers, and other farm machinery. Seamus, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do here at the University of Minnesota?
I'm a PhD. I graduated from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus in 2021. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher in the Thomas E. Murphy Engine Research Lab in the Twin Cities. I work for Professor Will Northrup, and I've been working on the use of ammonia as a fuel in engines and for combustion for 6 years now.
So you've been researching this concept of basically replacing diesel fuel or in combination with diesel fuel, adding ammonia as a fuel source in basically a tractor engine. During the presentation today, you sort of explained, some of the limitations of ammonia. Is a major limitation is that it's not very combustible? Is that the major issue?
Yes. So the biggest issue I would say with ammonia combustion is that it's poor fuel compared to what we know today, like gasoline and diesel. It doesn't burn very quickly. It's not very reactive or energetic during combustion, and that leads to a lot of issues with its combustion.
So what have you tried to do to kind of resolve some of those issues? How have you solved or tried to solve that problem?
Well, starting out, of course, we look at what other people have done, don't reinvent the wheel. And so, historically, to burn ammonia, people have seen a lot of success in laboratory settings by mixing it with existing hydrocarbon fuels. For example, mixing it with natural gas or gasoline or diesel. And they use the reactivity and the energetic potential of those hydrocarbon fuels in order to help the ammonia along and complete its combustion when used in an engine or when used in a combustor.
So I guess the question for a lot of farmers and people in the ag sector be, well, why? Why do we want to bother with ammonia or these other alternative fuels? I mean, diesel's been around, it's quite efficient. I mean, obviously diesel prices are high right now, but they may go down. So why go to this effort of looking at ammonia as an alternative fuel source?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. And, of course, the fuel cost is always a big one. You say that diesel prices may go down, and that's true, but what if they don't? It would be nice to have a backup, of course, something that remains steady or cheap or usable. The reason we're looking at ammonia, though, is that unlike diesel and unlike ethanol, there's no carbon involved in its production chemically. So the molecule doesn't contain any carbon, and so when burned, it only produces water. And so from an ecological standpoint, it produces less greenhouse gases, ideally, than the combustion of diesel or the combustion of gasoline. So that's a primary reason we're looking at it. But for farms specifically, the reason why ammonia is so attractive is because farmers already have ammonia around all the time. You're applying it to the field as a fertilizer in spring and fall, but you're never too far away from a co-op where you can acquire ammonia. And so the availability mixed with the ecological benefit is why ammonia seems so attractive for farm use.
Okay, so you've looked at the possibility of using it, as a fuel blend, in a tractor or other, farm machinery. But you also looked at the potential of grain, using it as a fuel for grain drying. What have you learned there? I know that you're still working on the publication of this research, but
yes,
what are some of your early findings in terms of the opportunity here for ammonia as a fuel source for grain drying?
I think that the opportunity for ammonia's use in grain drying is actually a lot higher. It has a lot higher potential for carbon dioxide reduction and for just like a public image type of thing, because when we burn ammonia in a grain dryer using, a typical a combustor like that used for propane and grain drying, we actually see that the ammonia can be convinced to burn a lot more easily than in an engine, because we have the benefit of a longer duration for the burn.
Okay.
And so what that means is as opposed to in an engine where the ammonia doesn't burn completely and we end up with ammonia coming out the tailpipe, or even worse, we end up with nitrogen oxides coming out the tailpipe. In the combustor cans of a grain dryer, we have almost complete combustion. There's no ammonia coming out of the grain dryer. And then we don't have any NOx. We don't have any CO2 because we're only burning ammonia. And we don't have any laughing gas, nitrous oxide, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. So by moving from engine to combustor, we actually mitigate a lot of the issues with ammonia's combustion just by changing the factor that we're burning it in.
Okay, so bigger picture, just stepping back here.
Sure.
Part of the research here, or what's being worked on here, is this concept of green ammonia. So producing ammonia using renewable sources like wind or solar. So if you take that combination of, if you produce a green ammonia with, these fuels, with these sources of energy that produces green ammonia, and then you use that to burn in a grain dryer, obviously that whole chain, you've reduced the amount of greenhouse gas emissions immensely. And that's the big win here for the ag sector.
Yes, that's right. Yep. By going through that big loop of generating the ammonia, storing it, and burning it, but not using propane to dry your grain, you end up saving all of the CO2 emissions and any of the, particulate or pollutants that the propane-powered grain dryer would have produced over your drying season.
Okay. But I guess as you present in your presentation is that the question comes down to, okay, before we produce all this green ammonia, there has to be a market for it. There has to be people who are operating grain dryers with ammonia and other markets in order for folks to go ahead and build a plant that produces this green ammonia. So the question is, what's going to come first?
Right. And I am of the opinion that the green ammonia production is going to come first, because if we look at the motivating factors for green ammonia today, it goes so much further beyond utilization, so using it for heat and power and in engines. If you just look at the price of ammonia today here in Morris, Minnesota, it's up 400% from when I first started doing work on ammonia. We've gone from $350 per metric ton all the way up to $1,650. So it's tied to the price of natural gas. And right now, I'm not an expert on the techno-economic aspects of ammonia production, but that $1,650 per metric ton for ammonia produced through natural gas, that price is making green ammonia look so competitive.
Right.
Like anybody right now who has the capital to start making green ammonia could make a killing at that price right now. So the demand for green ammonia is going to come from the demand for ammonia worldwide,
right.
Period.
So last question here. So the economics are right at this time for production, and perhaps in the longer term might some incentives be needed because of the environmental benefits, so that just like, there's support for ethanol and biofuels, perhaps in the longer term, there might be need for some public government support for this technology for it to have some staying power?
Yes, I certainly would agree that that's going to be necessary, and I don't think that ammonia prices are going to remain as high as they are right now. So that's a short-term driving factor in green ammonia production, but long-term, those prices are going to come back down, be it from conventional or be it from renewably produced ammonia. And so there may need to be incentives to help spur the green ammonia production, and there may also need to be incentives to help spur the use of ammonia as a fuel in the long term.
Right.
Just like how we have, EV credits right now, and you may need to push the consumer towards using that renewable ammonia to dry their grain in order to spur adoption and, kind of kickstart the whole process.
Okay, last one for you. You said you've been working on this for quite a while. This must be kind of an exciting time for you to be doing this research because there's so much interest right now in this technology and this opportunity.
Yeah, it certainly is a very exciting time. So I'm a researcher. That's what I do primarily. I own a startup company working on some of these technologies to get them into the hands of farmers and other people who may be interested in using ammonia as energy. And so I've called it, a sort of renaissance right now. Basically, ammonia energy has come home to roost in the U.S. It's been very popular overseas in Europe and Australia for a decade or two now. But finally, we're seeing this huge interest and a huge wave of investment in ammonia energy in the States. And so it's a very exciting time for me, yes.
Great. Well, thanks for speaking with me, Seamus. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Cheers. You've been listening to Seamus Kane, a mechanical engineer at the University of Minnesota. If you're looking for more information on green ammonia and its potential use in agriculture, a few stories on this topic can be found at producer.com. Well, that's it for this week's show. I'm Robert Arnason of the Western Producer. Thanks for listening.
Farm kids are fortunate. We inherit the land and the lessons that come with it. The lessons are more valuable. I learned early on while chopping thistle on our Kansas cattle farm the value of hard work. I use this every day at Case IH. Because if it's valuable, you pass it on. My name is Ryan. I am a farmer, and I work for Case IH.
Case IH, built by farmers.